One of the final lines is, Snowman looks at his wrists and he sees the empty watch and he says, this is 0 hour. So I'd like to, I was wondering what you thought about that, because I had one interpretation of that that was definitely changed once the year of the flood came out.
Yes, he says 0 hour, time to go. So in Oryx and Crake, from the perspective of Jimmy, and it's entirely from his perspective, time to go can mean either time for me to spring into action, or time for me to spring into action and be annihilated, or time for me to spring into action and those other people must go. Because what he's trying to decide is whether or not to make friends with these 3 human beings like himself that he suddenly sees, or whether they are a threat and he should get rid of them. And he doesn't answer that. We don't know what he's thinking at that moment, what he's going to do.
Sure, yeah, my interpretation was the latter, where he was going to wipe them out.
Well, that's your choice. The reader at that moment in the book supplies the answer. The answer comes from the reader. He has reasons for and against making that particular decision.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm a big fan. I'm not very well read in science fiction genre. So recently I was in Toronto and I went into a science fiction shop and told the woman there how much I love your work and asked for some recommendations. And she gave me a couple, but what would be your suggestion to somebody, where to start? The genre is so large, it's so varied in terms of quality, like any genre. Where to start to really delve into it?
Okay, do you want to start back in time or now?
Selection of 3 books that everybody should read.
Okay, if you haven't read the beginning of science fiction proper, that would be H.G. Wells in one strand of it. Time Machine, it's a short story, and The War of the Worlds, I would say, are 2 foundational stories. If you haven't read Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles or Fahrenheit 451, you might look at those. You might look at Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. You might look at John Wyndham's book, The Midwich Cuckoos, which I really think is pretty well put together. A lesser known one is a book by Russell Hoban called Ridley Walker, R-I-D-D-L-E-Y-W-A-L-K-E-R.
I hope my husband's writing this down.
Yes, if you haven't read Ursula Le Guin's, for instance, The Left Hand of Darkness, you could go there. You might wander into the work of Octavia Butler. I think there's probably some people in the audience who could recommend other things to you as well, but it depends whether you're interested in the kind of book that takes you to Star Trek territory, or whether you're more interested in the utopian, dystopian strain.
Definitely the utopian
dystopian. Okay, so probably not, you can't get along in that case without 1984, but The Time Machine is an early one of those kinds of books as well. The 19th century is crammed with utopias. There's just thousands of them. People writing books about how vastly the world would be improved if only we would follow their recipe. And it's also filled with people doing satires of that form. But things don't get really dark until the 20th century.
Thank you so much.
That's when the pancake flips.
Hi, I would like to know, since you just wrote a book about science fiction, does this signal if you're now prepared to call your work, which you previously called speculative fiction, science fiction?
No, because it doesn't take place on other planets or have aliens in it. And you can make a banner over the top called science fiction if you want to, and then make some subheadings. But Anybody who, and Ursula K. Le Guin herself, you know, we all admit that there's a difference between books about things that really cannot happen and about other books in which there are things that really can do and have happened. They're just two different kinds of books. And since I believe in truth in advertising, I don't want somebody to pick up one of my books thinking it's the other kind. You know, thinking that they're going to get the spaceships and the rockets and then they're not there. And I do cover that in the introduction. I had a similar moment with some of my covers. In fact, I've had several similar moments with my covers. My early paperbacks had covers on them that would make you think that these were Harlequin romances. They were pink and gold, they had scrolly lettering on them, they had a man's hand and a woman's hand, sort of like a valentine. And I think there were some rather upset readers and picked those books up thinking they were going to get one thing and then they got this other thing. And when the wall came down between East and West, and suddenly countries in the East Bloc could get pornography, which they had been denied, the literary publishers became quite distraught because suddenly their public had vanished as everybody was going for the porn. And the Robber Bride came out at that time, and one of my East Bloc countries has this amazingly porny cover on it, which I think caused a lot of men in raincoats to become very annoyed. It wasn't truth in advertising, and that wasn't what was in the book. So I don't like to mislead people.
Hi, this may be a somewhat random question. One of your drawings reminded me a little bit of Inuit art. And I'm wondering whether you've been influenced at all by the Inuit culture, which sees mysticism in sort of nature and natural life and realism.
Yeah, I wonder which one of my drawings.
We have to go back and see.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I do spend quite a lot of time up in the above the tree line. And you are in a culture that until very recently the spiritual life was shamanistic. And that is a very, very old form of religion. And it's pretty interesting because when you're looking at it, you're looking at something very much like the roots of religion. So I don't think it's out of the question. Remember, I grew up in the woods, and I do spend a lot of time in the north.
Yeah, there's one that particularly reminded me of the artist Kenneth Joak, the Canadian
Oh,
artist.
yeah. I think it may be because traditional Western art drew the outsides of things. It painted the outsides of things. And First Nations art and Inuit art paints the insides of things. So you see the outline of something, but then you see what's inside. And I seem to have done that from a child.
I know you're kind of an avid Twitter user, and I was just wondering how that's affected your relationship with your readers. And I mean, like you showed the example of how you tweeted about, oh, I'll do an illustration of, you know, you as a superhero, and you got responses.
That was fun.
Yeah, I think it's really how you use it a lot. But I was just wondering how did you start using it?
It was an accident.
Okay. And then, I mean, do you find you get a richer dialogue now between your readers and like their impressions of your work and talking about it, or?
It's 140 characters.
Yeah, that's true. But you tweet a lot, so I mean.
Yeah, it's because I've become a radio station. Again, it's an accident, but people send me things that they would quite like it if I would pass them on.
Yeah.
And they seem to know what the other people in that group might like to hear about. So when I say it was an accident, I built a website for my last novel, and as part of building that website, the people said, you need to have a Twitter feed. And I said, what is that? And they said, it's really easy, we will help you set it. So I thrashed around with that for a while. You can find my essay about Twitter if you put in NYRB, New York Review of Books. I did a piece on Twitter for their blog, which of course then went viral among the Twitter users because there's nothing they like to hear so much about as Twitter. So it's a specific form. It's not one that lends itself to really deep discussion, but it is one that lends itself to instant signaling. So you can think of earlier forms like telegraph. You know, there again, you were using short amounts of space because it costs more to do long ones. Or you might think of washroom graffiti, or you might think of tombstone verses, or you might think of people carving things on trees. It is a short form, in other words. People have done some very versatile things with it. And it is very handy for passing along news of certain kinds. During the Tahrir Square demonstrations in Egypt, a lot of the news of what was happening was getting out through people on the ground using Twitter. So it has many uses, and I don't think it's been thoroughly explored yet. It's been quite fascinating. I couldn't say that you get a richer sense of what a reader's experience has been. I think you need a longer form for that. But you can get referred to such things. You can get sent a URL that will take you to a blog that will have a longer discussion. As I say, it's a messaging thing. And I had to learn how to make those smiling faces. I think one of the best when I said, okay, how do you make a vampire using punctuation? And I think I got about 35 vampire emoticon models. Pointy teeth, brows, noses, fangs. Yes, different 35 vampires on Twitter.
Hi, so the picture of you writing Blind Assassin Berlin was really evocative. You had this large table alone. And I was just reminded of this event that occurred on this website called Reddit. It's this big social bookmarking site, lots of people comment on it. And one user started writing a story on there about a platoon of Marines that gets transported to Rome, to ancient Rome. And he started he wrote.
Where does it get transported to?
To ancient Rome.
To ancient Rome.
Yes. And so he started writing the story, and the commenters loved it. And he kept writing. And then suddenly, he started Kickstarter, he got some money, and then he started getting a book deal or something like that. I didn't follow it all the way through. But what was interesting there was this kind of rapid feedback that he received on this short piece of text, on this iteration, as it went through. And I just want to get your point of view on how that could contrast from the other perspective of, sitting and writing and thinking and doing it yourself and being alone and figuring it out, versus this rapid iteration that seems to be occurring now.
Well, it's occurring sometimes, but it has always occurred. And let us go back in time to the oral storyteller. And the thing about the oral storyteller was that the storyteller and the audience were in the same space. So if the audience didn't like how the story was going, you'd hear about it. And if they did like, of course, you'd hear about that too. So that to and fro play is not a new thing. It's occurred in other forms earlier. Charles Dickens wrote something called Numbers, which were little pamphlets of maybe 2 or 3 chapters. And he would put them out, and then he would get feedback from readers. And Mr. Pickwick's Papers was written that way, and the reason why the character called Sam Weller becomes so prominent in the Pickwick Papers is that readers really liked him. He was the first sort of Cockney character that they could identify with, so Sam Weller got more and more of a part. And you see the same thing with daytime soaps. The characters that get really popular, or else people don't like them so much and they kind of are written out of the story, or they have a fight with the producer and then they have to be murdered. So this to and fro, it goes on. writing a book all by yourself and getting it all complete and then giving it to a publisher is one model. But it's not the only model, and it hasn't been the only model ever. It's never been the only model. So the internet facilitates that kind of interaction, but it's not as if everybody's going to change to doing that. They're actually not. And again, somebody could start something on Reddit and not get much feedback at all, and that would be the end of it.
I think we have time for just one more question, which is Stephen has been standing here, and then Ms. Atwood will stay on stage and sign a few books. Thank you.
I have a question and kind of a news update, so maybe I'll start with that.
A news update.
Information. It's often been said that your speculative fiction is predictive, and I don't know if you know that the newest UN agency in the United Nations system actually has a name that you invented in The Handmaid's Tale. I work at the UN, and this is the UN gender entity for the UN entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women, UNGEEW, which is such an ugly acronym that it's called UN Women for short, or UNWomen. We didn't like the name Unwomen, but we were so proud and happy when we found, of course, in The Handmaid's Tale that this refers to the feminists, the radicals, the outcasts, the lesbians, the challenging women. So we felt much better about ourselves when we found ourselves again in you, or in your book.
Thank you for sharing.
My question is about science fiction and age, or aging and maturity. Science fiction is often thought to be a very youthful genre, a very kind of young, very male, often genre. You know, quite aside from the bunnies, the flying bunnies, you came to it later on.
And as you read the book, you'll realize that that's not entirely true. It was, I was there all along. But never mind, keep going.
Well, the question has to do with, is this it now? Are you in this genre now? Is this where you're going to stay? I'm thinking about other writers.
I never predict the future.
I'm thinking about other writers like Doris Lessing, who went through the same trajectory, the reflections on being a woman in the 20th century, and as well as historical reflection as well, like Alias Grace. And then ending up with slightly dystopic, often near-future scenarios. And I'm wondering, does this approach have anything, I mean, are you coming to science fiction and loving it as part of kind of maturity and age?
Well, I don't think so. No, I don't think that's exactly how it works. I think that it could work that way. I don't think in my case that it does. I think one of the things that happens is that you may permit yourself to do riskier things than you might have permitted yourself to do at a younger age, partly because you know the plot. You know most of the plot. You know kind of how it's going to turn out. Or let me put it this way. At my age, I'm much more than halfway through. Or let me put it another way. I say to young people, they say, what about this problem, that problem? In 30 years, what do you think? And I said, well, actually, that's not going to be my problem. That's going to be your problem because I will be dead. No, you won't. I said, yes, I will. No, you won't. So there is that. So that really cheerful note. Yes, I will. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful big read. I'm sure that you will, and go exploring, because time marches on. You wouldn't want not to have done it.